Hello, welcome everybody. I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Welcome to a reading stream. Really chill. I like these. I'm actually doing a lot of housework today, but I'm taking a quick break because otherwise my head's gonna explode, and we're gonna read. So, just for about 45 minutes to an hour, nothing crazy. But I thought it would be a fun idea, since I've been doing these reading streams, to take a break to kind of alternate between the Lemony Snicket series, which I've been doing, and it's been really fun, and the books that the Nancy Drew games, which I've also been streaming, are based on. So I thought it would be fun to kind of watch to be able to discuss the comparison sort of thing. I thought that would be fun. So we're going to start with Nancy Drew Secrets Can Kill. So this is Nancy Drew Files. This was a series of Nancy Drew books that was started in the mid-80s, and it reflects very much upon that time. So it's pretty funny. I think part of this book is one of those things where it's like, oh my gosh, this is such an 80s teen book. But it's still Nancy. There's still a mystery. It's just a little bit different than her classic self. But if you guys are ready, without further ado, I am just going to go ahead and jump on in. So, all right. So, Chapter 1. Hands on her hips, Nancy Drew stood in the middle of her bedroom and surveyed the situation. New clothes lay everywhere, strewn across the bed, draped over the backs of chairs, and spilling out of shopping bags. Laughing at the mess, Nancy reached for a just-bought pair of designer jeans. "How do you like the new look in Private Detectives?" she said, slipping the jeans on. "Undercover and overdressed." "I'd give anything to have a job like yours." Bess Marvin studied the label on an oversized green sweater that would be perfect with Nancy's reddish-blonde hair. "Not only did you get to buy a whole closet full of clothes for it, but you'll probably be asked out by every good-looking boy at Bedford High." George Fane swallowed the last of her frozen yogurt and asked, "What's going on at that school anyway?" "I don't know all the details yet, but it doesn't sound too terrible," Nancy said. "Lockers broken into, A few files and some video equipment missing, stuff like that. She zipped up the jeans and took the sweater Bess was holding out. The principal, Mr. Parton, said he'd tell me more tomorrow. I won't say the case is going to be a piece of cake, Nancy said with a grin, but it doesn't exactly sound like the hardest sleuthing I've ever done either. At 18, Nancy Drew already had a reputation in her hometown of River Heights as one of the brightest, hottest young detectives around, and she'd earned every bit of that reputation the hard way, by tracking down clues and solving mysteries that ranged from arson to kidnapping. Nancy took every case seriously, of course, but somehow, going undercover as a high school student to find a small-time vandal just didn't seem very heavy. After all, she'd been up against some really tough characters in the past, like armed robbers and blackmailers. Nancy studied herself in the mirror. She liked what she saw. The tight jeans looked great on her long, slim legs, and the green sweater complemented her strawberry blonde hair. Her eyes flashed with the excitement of a new case. She was counting on solving the little mystery fairly easily. In fact, Nancy thought it would probably be fun. Right now, she said to her two friends, the hardest part of this case is deciding what to wear. That outfit definitely, Bess said, sighing with envy at Nancy's slender figure. You'll make the guys absolutely drool. That's all she needs, George joked, a bunch of freshmen following her around like underage puppies. Oh yeah, have you seen the captain of the Bedford football team? Bess rolled her eyes. They don't call him Hunk Hogan for nothing. Bess and George were Nancy's best friends, and they were cousins, but that was about all they had in common. Blonde-haired Bess was bubbly and easygoing and always on the lookout for two things, a good diet and a great date. So far she hadn't found either. She was constantly trying to lose 5 pounds, and she fell in and out of love every other month. George, with curly dark hair and a shy smile, was quiet, with a dry sense of humor and the beautifully toned body of an athlete. George liked boys as much as Bess did, but she was more serious about love. When I fall, she'd say, it's going to be for real. Both girls had helped Nancy to solve cases in the past, and they'd just spent the entire day with her at the shopping mall, helping Bedford High's new girl choose her new wardrobe. Anyway, Bess went on, Nancy will be completely immune to the charms of Hunk Hogan. She's got Ned, right, Nan? Right. Nancy glanced at the mirror above her dresser where she'd stuck a snapshot of Ned Nickerson, and her grin changed to a soft smile as she thought of the first boy she'd ever loved. Nancy and Ned had a very special relationship. They'd known each other since they were kids, and when they'd first realized they'd loved each other, they thought it would last forever. But neither one was ready yet for a forever commitment, so occasionally they drifted apart, dating other people. Yet somehow Nancy always found herself coming back to Ned. They were so in tune with each other that no matter what they were doing, whether it was tracking down the clues to a mystery or planning a private party for two, it seemed that they could read each other's thoughts. Nancy smiled to herself and wondered if Ned knew what she was thinking at that moment, which was that as good as he looked in a photograph with his light brown hair, soft dark eyes, and gently curving mouth, Ned was 100 times better in the flesh. Shivering as she remembered the feel of his arms around her, Nancy promised herself that when she solved the Bedford High case, she would definitely join him for a long weekend with his family at their cabin in the mountains. You're right, she said again. In my eyes, no guy can compete with Ned, but if I meet some really gorgeous senior, I'll be sure to get his number for you. Great! Bess fingered the gold locket she always wore around her neck. When she was in love, the locket carried a picture of the lucky boy. At the moment, it was empty. But I don't want to be a complete hog, she said with a laugh. Get a number for George, too. George blushed and tossed a pillow at her cousin. No thanks, I'll find my own guy. I've heard that before, Bess joked. Come on, Nancy's in a perfect position to fix us up. Who knows when we'll have a chance like this again? George tossed a second pillow, but by then she was laughing too. Nancy's supposed to be solving a crime, not setting us up. Who cares? She can do both, right, Nan? Bess tossed one of the pillows at Nancy. Nancy tossed it back, and in a few seconds the girls were in the middle of a full-fledged pillow fight. Soon the room was a bigger mess than ever, as feathers flew from the pillows and slowly drifted down onto the piles of clothes and shopping bags. The free-for-all was still going strong when the Drews' housekeeper stuck her head around the door and good-naturedly dodged a flying pillow. Hannah Gruen had been with the Drews since Nancy was born. After Mrs. Drew died, when Nancy was still a baby, Hannah's role had grown way beyond that of housekeeper. Mrs. Gruen had hugged and scolded Nancy through childhood, bandaging scraped knees and kissing away tears. As the years went by, she was always ready with encouragement and advice. And of course the hugging and scolding had continued too. In time, Hannah had become almost a second mother to Nancy. She was always there when Nancy's father's work as a lawyer took him away from his daughter. Carson Drew trusted Hannah implicitly, and Nancy loved her without question. "Hannah," Nancy giggled when she saw Mrs. Gruen in the doorway. "I know what you're going to say. It's school night, and I'd better get cleaning my room fast and get to bed early." "Well, I couldn't help thinking that you are starting a new assignment tomorrow, and you should probably get a good night's rest," Hannah said. "But the real reason I'm here is to give you this." She handed Nancy a bulky manila envelope. Nancy took it and saw her name printed in black marker. There was no return address, no stamp, no postmark. "Where'd this come from?" she asked. "I haven't the vaguest idea," Hannah replied. "I went out to sweep the front porch about 5 minutes ago, and there it was, poking out of the mailbox." Nancy fingered the package, then held it up to her ear. "Well, it's not ticking," she joked. She ripped open the envelope and pulled out an unlabeled videotape. "Oh, terrific," Bess said. "A movie. I've been dying to see a good movie lately." "Too bad we don't have any popcorn," George said as they trooped down the hall toward the den. "I just bought a bag," Hannah said, heading for the kitchen. "Come help yourselves if you get hungry." In the den, Nancy turned on the television and then opened the cabinet that held the VCR. "I wish I knew where this came from," she said. "Who goes around leaving videotapes on people's doorsteps?" "Maybe it's some advertising gimmick," Bess suggested. "No, I've got it," George began laughing. "It's that workout tape that Bess was so interested in, the one with all the gorgeous hunks." Nancy grinned. "Yeah, I had the feeling she was more interested in the hunks than the exercises." She slipped the tape into the deck and pushed the play button. "Okay," she said, joining Bess and George on the couch. "Get ready." The girls were still laughing as the movie started, but after the first few seconds the laughter stopped. "What is this anyway?" George asked. Leaning forward from her corner of the couch, Bess gave a little cry of surprise. "It's us," she said. "Look." In silence, the girls watched themselves doing exactly what they'd done 6 hours earlier, entering the shopping mall and arguing about which store to go to first. But after that, the camera stayed almost exclusively on Nancy. There she was, studying the mannequins in the window of a fashionable boutique. There she was again, coming out of a store called Ups and Downs, checking her pocketbook. "You were afraid you'd left your credit card in the store," Bess said. "Remember?" "I remember." Nancy didn't take her eyes off the screen. "But I don't remember anybody hanging around with a video camera taping the whole thing." The tape stayed on Nancy riding the escalator, going in and out of stores, sipping a Coke. Then it showed the three friends eating hot dogs by the fountain in the center of the mall. "It's true," Bess remarked. "The camera does add 10 pounds. George shook her head. "This has to be some kind of weird joke." "It's weird, all right," Nancy agreed, "but if it's a joke, I'm not laughing." "There can't be much more," Bess said. "Panache was the last store we went into." Sure enough, as they watched themselves come out of Panache, the camera zoomed in on Nancy. The last frame froze, in a close-up of her smiling face. Nancy was reaching out to turn the tape off when a screeching, whining sound made her stop, her hand in mid-air. Then a high-pitched, hideously shrieking voice invaded the Drews' cozy den. "Stick with shopping, Nancy Drew. It's a lot safer than snooping at Bedford High." Dun dun dun. All right. Hello, Screw Reality Bub. Welcome. I've never seen you. Pulls blanket over while Auntie V's reading, which is a creepy thing to say. I'm actually older. It's all right. Welcome. I hope you're enjoying. I'm just reading the book that the first Nancy Drew PC game is based off of and gonna compare. So obviously in the beginning of the game, Nancy is not hanging out with Bess and George, and they don't get a tape of themselves. They don't mention gorgeous hunks either. But all right. Yes, that's really in the book. I'm not like making this up as I go. I always have to hold my headset when I drink, because when I tip my head back, it like falls off my head. Oh, and there it goes. Good afternoon, by the way, to everybody. All right. Moving along. Chapter 2. Early the next morning, as Nancy was pulling her red Mustang out of the Drews' driveway, the sound of the frightening voice came back to her once again. "Stick to shopping, huh?" Nancy muttered under her breath. "Fat chance." She shifted her car into drive and was just stepping on the gas when she saw Hannah hurrying out the front door. "You almost forgot this," Hannah said, handing Nancy an orange canvas duffel bag that held notebooks, pens, and makeup, everything Nancy had packed for her first day at school. "Thanks, Hannah." Nancy stifled a yawn and smiled as she took the bag. "I almost forgot my most important prop for this job." "You don't look very alert this morning, I must say," Hannah commented. "In fact, you look downright sleepy." "I'm fine, Hannah, really. See you later." Nancy waved cheerfully as she drove from her house, but Hannah had been right. Nancy was definitely less than bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. No wonder, Nancy thought. Getting to sleep the night before had been next to impossible. She was always a little edgy before she started a new case, but the past night had been worse than usual. She'd lain awake, running the mysterious videotape through her mind over and over again. The creepiest part was that horrible voice. The sound of it had echoed in Nancy's head all night and into the morning. It had obviously been electronically distorted, but realizing that didn't make it any less scary. And knowing that someone had been following her all day was definitely frightening. Nancy couldn't help thinking about the video equipment that had been taken from Bedford High. Could there be any link between the two, Nancy wondered? Who was responsible, and why? Why would some high school kid who was rifling lockers and stealing a few files go to such trouble to scare her off? And how did whoever it was know about Nancy's assignment? That was the question which had kept the young detective awake the longest. Nancy had tried not to think about those pieces to the Bedford High puzzle. She knew she wouldn't figure them out until she actually got to the school campus and did some on-the-spot research. Still, she hadn't been able to keep her mind off the troubling questions, and there she was on the first day of a case, nervous and droopy-eyed. As she drove the 15 miles from River Heights to the town of Bedford, Nancy tuned the car radio to her favorite rock station, hoping the music would clear her head. She slowed, passing the local Ford dealer. The new Mustang GT convertible she'd been drooling over was still inside. "Be cool, Nancy," she said to herself with a half-smile, trying to keep her heart from pounding. Then pressing her foot to the accelerator, she zoomed toward town. Bedford was beautiful, small, but with large homes surrounded by lush lawns, and no doubt swimming pools tucked away in the back somewhere. On the outskirts of town, along the road to the high school, Nancy passed several houses that could only be described as mansions. Bedford was obviously a place where a lot of rich people lived, Nancy thought as she pulled up to the stoplight near the high school. At that moment, a sleek, expensive black Porsche 911 eased up beside her in the next lane. Nancy glanced over, admiring the car, and its owner gently revved the engine. The powerful motor gave a soft, throaty rumble, then another. Nancy smiled at the obvious come-on and lifted her gaze to the driver. The guy in the Porsche was one of the most gorgeous boys Nancy had ever seen. He looked about 17. He'd probably been a towhead when he was little, but now his blonde hair was highlighted with streaks of honey brown. And his eyes, were they brown or black, were full of light and laughter as he gave Nancy a playful grin and revved the engine once more. Suddenly Nancy was wide awake. She grinned back and fluttered the gas pedal on the Mustang. "Two can play this game," she thought. Out of the corner of her eye, Nancy saw the turn arrow change to green. Still looking at the boy, she smoothly shifted gears. Then she peeled out ahead of the Porsche, swinging wide into his lane so that he had to follow her all the way down Bedford Road. She was definitely back in high school. Nancy lost sight of the Porsche somewhere in Bedford High's student parking lot, and as she joined the crowd of kids swarming up the school's front steps, she stopped thinking about it. Of course, its driver wasn't quite so easy to forget. Bedford High wasn't big, with a total enrollment of about 600 students, but it seemed to Nancy as if every one of those students was milling around in the building's big front hall. They looked like a typical bunch of kids. While they waited for the final bell, they laughed together, calling to each other, talking about dates and upcoming tests. For a moment, Nancy felt exactly what she was pretending to be, a transfer student coming into a new school in the middle of fall semester. There she was, facing a bunch of strangers who already knew each other and were checking her out, trying to figure out who the new girl was. She felt exposed and self-conscious, and like all new kids, she wished she had a friend nearby. "That's the way you're supposed to feel," Nancy told herself. At least it was a good cover. Nancy was standing alone, trying to remember the directions to the principal's office that she'd been given, when a snatch of conversation caught her attention. "You know, I can't give you a ride," a boy's voice said. Nancy could detect the frantic pleading in it. "I just can't. If I miss practice, I'll be kicked off the team." Then came a second boy's voice, calm and slow and coldly self-assured. "Miss practice, or else," it ordered. Nancy craned her neck, trying to locate the source of that unpleasant little exchange. There was no way, however, to match the voices to any of the faces in the mass of chattering students around her. I guess there was at least one super creep in every high school, Nancy thought to herself, but as she headed for the principal's office, she kept hearing the harsh sound of that cold, calm voice. There was an intimidating power in it, and obviously whomever it belonged to had someone scared. Nancy turned down one of Bedford High's drab green hallways. No matter how much high schools changed, she decided the paint jobs never seemed to. Nancy found the principal's office and told the secretary she had an appointment with Mr. Parton. The principal didn't keep Nancy waiting 5 seconds. Stepping into the office, Nancy took one look at Mr. Parton and decided to try to solve this case in record time. Not only did she want that weekend with Ned, but Mr. Parton looked like he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. For the sake of his health, she better work fast. "It's driving me insane," Mr. Parton declared, dramatically pounding his fists against his temples. "And are the police any help?" "No. Beef up security, they say." "Ha! Try getting the salary for another guard out of the school board. A patrol car drives around the school every night. We can't be bothered with a little file filching. It's your problem, they say." Mr. Parton paused for a breath, and then chuckled to himself, shaking his bald head and smiling at Nancy with worried brown eyes. "Thank heavens I know your father. If he hadn't suggested that I hire you, I don't know what I would have done." "Probably collapsed," Nancy told herself, but she kept her thoughts silent. She smiled. "I'm glad you did call me, Mr. Parton. I'm ready to get started, but first I just want to make sure I've got the facts straight. You mentioned files being taken. What files?" "Actually, we're not sure." Mr. Parton shook his head again. But my file cabinet and the senior guidance counselors, both of which are kept locked, by the way, have been tampered with several times. We don't know if anything's missing because everything's always put back in the wrong place." "Then there are the lockers," Mr. Parton went on, rubbing one hand over his shiny head. "We know that at least 4 lockers have been broken into. Our maintenance man reported them." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "But no students complained." "It could have something to do with drugs," Nancy suggested. "That would explain why the kids kept their mouths shut." "True, and I won't say that Bedford High is drug-free, but I do know for sure that there aren't any drugs in my file cabinet. And what about the school video equipment?" Right, Nancy thought, remembering the movie she'd received. "Whoever's taking this stuff is very selective," the principal said. "We lose a lens here, a battery pack there, and then a couple of blank tapes. Some of it's even turned up mysteriously a few days after disappearing." "And you're sure whoever's pulling all these stunts is one person?" Nancy asked. "I'm not sure of anything," Mr. Parton said, frustration mounting in his voice. "But I'm almost certain that a student or more than one student is behind it all." "Why couldn't it be a teacher?" "Well, the police, much as I'm disappointed in them, did do me one favor. They questioned the faculty, checked them out, and came up with zilch, except for the bio teacher who turned out to be a scofflaw. $200 in unpaid parking tickets." Nancy laughed. "Well, having me pose as a student was a good idea." She stood up and reached for her canvas bag. "I'd like to get started, but first I need to know if I have your permission to check things out my own way. I mean, I may have to break a few rules to get to the bottom of this." "Whatever it takes. I'll clear it with the police," Mr. Parton said emphatically. "And don't go yet." He motioned for Nancy to sit again. "I may not be thinking too clearly these days, but I do know that you'll need a contact while you're here. Someone you can talk to freely. Someone who can introduce you to a lot of kids. The principal isn't going to help any student fit in, even I know that." "Your thinking's not all that fuzzy, Mr. Parton." Nancy laughed again. "So who's my contact?" "One of our seniors. A good student, completely trustworthy, and very popular. President of the class, which is why I chose him. He can get you in touch with all the various crowds." "You mean he knows about me already?" Nancy asked, once again thinking about the videotape. "No, I thought I'd introduce you to and let him in on the plan at the same time." Mr. Parton checked his watch. "He should be here any minute." At that moment there was a knock at the door. Mr. Parton opened it, and Nancy looked up and found herself face to face with the beautiful driver of the black Porsche. "Nancy Drew," the principal said. "Meet Darryl Gray." His eyes weren't brown or black, Nancy noticed immediately. They were the dark, dusky color of ripe blueberries, and they were rimmed with lashes that had to be at least half an inch long. Nancy had never seen eyes like that in her life. Some contact, she thought. Darryl Gray listened politely and with interest as Mr. Parton explained the entire situation. If he was surprised at Nancy's role, he didn't show it. Instead, Darryl's incredible eyes kept straying to Nancy each time Mr. Parton mentioned her name, and when the principal said something about Darryl showing Nancy the ropes, Darryl's mouth curved into a slow, teasing grin. Nancy couldn't help returning it. The attraction between them crackled like electricity. Nancy wondered how Mr. Parton could possibly miss the sparks, but he seemed oblivious to everything but his problem. He went on and on. As Nancy tuned out the principal's voice, she turned She tuned into the beautiful face before her. I'm laughing too hard, I'm sorry. Finally, the harried principal said something that brought Nancy back to reality. Nancy, the school is counting on you. I've done what I can. Now it's up to you. At this moment, Daryl is the only one aside from me who knows who you are and what you're doing here. The rest is in your hands. And Nancy, remembering that hideous voice on the tape, finally tore her eyes away from Daryl. You're wrong, Mr. Parton, she thought. Somebody else knows who I am, and that's the person I have to find. That was the end of chapter 2. Let's catch up. Yeah, I'm sorry, Paige. I streamed early. Basically, I am getting really tired of doing housework, so I'm just taking a break, and I'll go back to housework when I'm done. I don't know what a towhead is, and it was pronounced, or it was spelled T-O-W. Towhead. More gorgeous hunks. Nancy's like a mix of emo and wanting a boyfriend in this badly. This doesn't seem like a PG books. This is really entertaining for me to like compare the two between like book and game, because there's definitely some differences, especially like how in the game Nancy doesn't really return any of Daryl's flirts, but obviously she's into it in this book, so it's funny. Alright, 2 or 3 more chapters, we'll see how long they are. Chapter 3. The warning bell rang just as Nancy and Daryl left Mr. Parton's office. Together they fell into step with the crowd of kids hurrying to their homeroom classes. Out of the corner of her eye, Nancy caught Daryl looking at her, a strange little smile on his lips. What's funny? She asked. Nothing. Daryl laughed softly and shook his head. It's just I've never met a detective, especially a beautiful redhead who drives a Mustang. Nancy laughed too. Well, I've never met a senior who drives a Porsche. It's my favorite toy. They rounded a corner and Daryl casually put his hand on Nancy's shoulder to guide her out of the way of a group of kids coming in the opposite direction. I'll have to give you a ride sometime, show you what it can do. At the touch of Daryl's hand, Nancy felt a delicious tingling sensation, and suddenly she found herself wondering what it would be like to have Daryl's arms around her. Daryl Gray was a powerfully attractive guy. Do you think it would be good for making fast getaways? Nancy went on in the same teasing manner. Sure, Daryl replied, leaving his hand where it was, but I hope you're not planning to make a getaway real soon. After all, we just met. And besides, I have a mystery to solve, remember? Right, and I hope it takes a long time. They were both laughing, looking into each other's eyes as they turned another corner and bumped into what felt to Nancy like a rock wall. Sorry, the wall said. Nancy touched her nose to make sure it wasn't broken and then smiled at the guy, who was big and handsome and built like a truck. Walt, meet Nancy Drew. She's a transfer student, Daryl said smoothly. Nancy, Walt Hogan. Nancy smiled again, remembering what Bess had said about Bedford's football captain. Hunk fit him perfectly. Yeah, Walt said, not returning her smile. Nice to meet you. Walt strode off, and Nancy turned to Daryl. He seemed a little angry, she commented. Yeah, he hasn't been Mr. Friendly lately, Daryl agreed. And you should see him in action on the field. He's like a bear just out of hibernation. Mean and hungry. I don't suppose he's a video freak by any chance. I thought detectives were supposed to be more subtle than that. Why should I be subtle with you? Nancy teased. You're my contact, aren't you? Daryl's hand tightened on Nancy's shoulder. I sure am, he said softly. Nancy and Daryl were standing in front of Nancy's homeroom class, waiting for the final bell to ring. About 10 other kids were waiting, too, and as Nancy laughed at Daryl's last remark, she caught a girl staring at them. The girl was blonde, pretty in a tough, hard-edged kind of way, but she didn't look too friendly, Nancy thought. She was watching Daryl intently. Then as someone called out, Carla! She moved her eyes to Nancy's face for just a second before turning away. In that brief instant, she gave Nancy the strangest look. It wasn't a look of dislike, Nancy thought. It was more like a challenge. She wondered how much this Carla knew about her. The final bell rang, and Daryl gave Nancy's shoulder another squeeze. I guess this is it for now, he said. He leaned so close that Nancy felt his breath on her ear. You're on your own, detective. Actually, Nancy didn't expect to do much detecting on her first day. She was new in school. She had to find her way around, get used to the rhythm of the place, and meet a few people before she could start asking questions. Part of Nancy's cover was to act like a new girl, lost and a little out of it, which was easy since that was how she felt. Daryl wasn't in any of her classes and she didn't know anyone else. Most of the kids ignored Nancy. The first really friendly girl she met was a pretty blonde with aquamarine eyes who waylaid Nancy after English. "Hi, I'm Sarah Ames," she said. "You're new here, aren't you?" "My name's Nancy Drew, and you're right, I'm brand new." "Well, don't worry, you'll fit in fast," Sarah said, "but I wanted to get to you before anyone else did." "Oh?" Nancy wondered if Sarah might have some secret information. "I'm editor of the Bedford Sentinel," Sarah went on, "and we're desperate for people to work on the paper. I noticed in English that you can at least read and write," she joked, "and I bet you're going to be popular, so you'll have lots of good contacts. The Sentinel's fun. What do you think?" Nancy smiled to herself at the thought of her contact. She smiled at Sarah, too, for making her feel welcomed. "Thanks for asking," she said. "Let me feel my way around a little more, okay? And then I'll let you know." "Great! There's a staff meeting tonight, room 215. I hope you can make it." With a friendly wave, Sarah dashed down the hall. Nancy's next class was American history. She'd almost forgotten how boring a bad teacher could be, but the droning voice, the intimidating looks, all of it reminded her why she'd been happy to leave high school behind. She'd certainly be happy to leave history behind. The 45-minute period dragged on and on. Halfway through, Nancy let her mind wander. Anything was better than the teacher's monotone. Purposely putting Bedford High's mystery out of her mind, Nancy thought about Sarah Ames's offer to join the newspaper staff. She was tempted to accept it. Maybe she could have a double cover, new girl and student reporter, investigating the vandal of Bedford High. It might work, she thought, but once she solved the case, she'd be leaving the school, and that would leave Sarah minus one reporter. It didn't seem fair. When American history was finally over, Nancy heaved a sigh of relief along with the rest of the students. "Class," the teacher called over the noise of the final bell, "read the next 2 chapters in your textbook for homework." Great, Nancy groaned to herself. Boring homework, too. The Bedford High mystery was turning out to have hidden liabilities. On the way to lunch, Nancy spotted Sarah Ames at the entrance to the cafeteria and decided to tell her she wouldn't be joining her newspaper. That way Sarah wouldn't feel hurt when Nancy didn't show up at the staff meeting. "Hi," Nancy said. "Listen, thanks for asking me to join the paper, but I think I'd better make sure my grades are in good shape before I do anything else, you know?" "Okay," said Sarah. "I understand. Just let me know whenever you're ready." "Thanks," said Nancy. Sarah rushed off and Nancy entered the cafeteria. She looked around uncertainly. Where should she sit? At that moment she heard someone call her name. Turning, she saw Connie Watson waiting in the cafeteria line. Nancy knew Connie's name because the teacher had called on her in French class. Connie's face had turned the color of a ripe tomato as she'd given her answer, and after class Nancy had noticed that no one walked out of the room with her. Connie was slightly pudgy, but her eyes, though anxious and a little fearful, were friendly. She smiled shyly and said, "Hey, would you like to eat lunch with me?" "I wish I could," Nancy said sincerely, "but I've got to talk to the counselor about my schedule. I've been stuck with 2 gym classes. Can you believe that? I'm just going to grab a yogurt and keep going." What Nancy really wanted was a chance to snoop around the video lab, providing it was empty. If it wasn't, maybe she could ask a few innocent questions. After promising Connie she'd sit with her the next day, Nancy paid for her yogurt, headed down the hall, turned a corner, and stopped. "Some detective you are," she told herself. "You didn't even bother to find out where the video lab was." Nancy was about ready to go back to the cafeteria and ask Connie when she saw Carla walking toward her. Nancy hadn't forgotten the challenging look Carla had given her that morning, but she put on a bright smile anyway. "Hi, this is embarrassing, but I'm lost. Could you point me in the direction of the video lab?" "Oh, it's easy to get lost in this place," Carla said with a friendly smile. "Just go to the end of this hall, turn left, and follow that hall to the end. Then go through the door on your right and down the stairs. You can't miss it." "Thanks," Nancy said just as nicely. "I appreciate it." Maybe I was just being paranoid this morning, she thought as she walked along. Nancy turned left and went down the second hall. She pushed open the door, started down the steps, and stopped. The staircase obviously wasn't going to take her to the video lab. From the look of things, it would probably lead straight to the boiler room. On the other hand, she thought, maybe Carla really is a prime pain in the you-know-what. Or maybe Carla had something to do with the anonymous videotape. That might explain why she would want to go out of her way to steer Nancy away from the video lab. Nancy was moving back up the stairs when she heard scuffling sounds from below. She stopped, listening, and then heard a muffled shout. "Just lay off, Jake," a voice said. "I've given you what you want, so get off my back." The voice grew angrier. "You're a nobody, Webb, a real waste of space. Why don't you make like a ghost and vanish?" Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Before Nancy could move, Walt Hogan, the surly star of the football team, was beside her. He wasn't just surly, though. He was furious, his face flushed with anger. Walt shouldered Nancy roughly aside, then his fury exploded and he rammed his clenched fists into the door before shoving it open and storming through. While Nancy tried to decide whether to run after Walt, she heard a soft laugh. Looking down, she saw another boy, one she hadn't met before, staring up at her. "Well, if it isn't Bedford High's newest scholar, Nancy Drew," the boy sneered. "I'm Jake Webb." Jake smiled as he began climbing the stairs toward Nancy, but the look in his eyes was cold. "Do you always go around poking your nose into other people's business?" he asked. "Not too nice, Nancy Drew. Maybe I ought to explain a few rules to you. Otherwise, you won't get very far at Bedford High." Nancy recognized the voice. It was the same one she'd heard in the main hall that morning, coolly ordering some desperate kid to miss practice or else. Jake's face went with his voice, Nancy thought, lean and bony with a tight-lipped smile under sharp, ice-blue eyes. Nancy felt an overwhelming urge to tell the creep to buzz off, but Jake wasn't acting like the average high school egomaniac, and she was curious to see what he was up to. Jake climbed the stairs until his eyes were level with Nancy's. Still smiling, he ran one finger lazily up her arm, across her neck and to her lips. "Rule 1, Jake said softly. "Keep your mouth shut about what you just heard. If you don't, you'll never learn Rule 2. Chapter 3. So much sexual tension in this. I know, it's weird, right? It's like the Nancy Drew files were that way. It's strange. Hi, Snoop. Welcome. I hope you're enjoying taking mental notes as to the comparison. So a couple things I've noticed is that they call him Hunk Hogan instead of Hulk Hogan like they do in the game. Carla doesn't exist in the game. Sarah doesn't exist in the game. Connie is pudgy in the book, apparently. And Nancy actually meets Jake in the book. So these are the differences that I'm kind of seeing so far. But yeah, pretty crazy stuff. I might eat this piece of chocolate real quick before I read a little bit more, like maybe one more chapter. My nose is itchy. Sometimes when I do reading streams, I notice my nose gets itchy. I don't know why. Hello. Welcome. Alright, I'm going to keep going. Chapter 4. Nancy was tempted to bite Jake's finger and see what happened, but instead she forced herself to push his hand away calmly. She was so furious she didn't even think about being frightened. Who did this guy think he was anyway? "Who makes these rules?" she asked. "You, I suppose?" "Clever, Nancy," Jake said with a laugh. "Go to the head of the class." The longer Nancy stood there, the stronger the urge she had to push Jake Webb down the stairs. She'd already decided that he was a prime candidate for the Bedford High Vandal, not to mention the Bedford Town Jail, but at the moment all she wanted was to get rid of him. "Look," she said, "I don't know what you're trying to do, but I think I ought to tell you that I don't scare easily." She put her hand on the door. "Why don't you just crawl back under your rock?" Without waiting for Jake's reaction, Nancy pulled the door open and almost bumped into Darryl Gray. "Well, well," Jake scoffed, "it's King Cool." Completely ignoring Jake, Darryl smiled at Nancy. "Hi, I expected to see you in the cafeteria." "She couldn't make it," Jake said. "She had more important things to do than eat." "You okay?" Darryl asked Nancy. "I was getting a little bored with the company, but I'm fine now," she said. "How'd you know I was here?" "Are you kidding?" Jake leaned against the door jamb and grinned. "King Cool has the inside track on everything. Girls, cars, clever ways to make money. Right, King?" Quickly, Darryl shifted his glance to Jake. "You talk too much, Webb," he said sharply. "I'm tired of the sound of your voice. Do everyone a favor and give your mouth a rest." "Anything you say, King." Jake held Darryl's gaze for a second. "But my eyes will still be open. You can count on that." Then he slouched off down the hall. Nancy let out her breath. What was all that business about your money and keeping his eyes open? Hard to tell with that guy, Daryl said. How did you run into him anyway? Nancy explained and noticed a funny look on Daryl's face when she mentioned Carla, but she decided not to ask about it. Anyway, I'm just glad you came along, she said. I was just about ready to blow my cover with that creep. Jake Webb's personality fits his name, Daryl said with a grimace. He's just like a spider, waiting for a fly to come along. I can't believe he actually works in the principal's office, but most of us here aren't candidates for the psycho ward like he is. I'll prove it to you if you'll come to the dance with me this weekend. That's a pretty intriguing invitation, Nancy said with a coy smile. I'm too curious to turn you down. It's a date, then. Daryl touched her arm in a familiar gesture before walking away. Once again, Nancy thrilled to the feel of his hand. As she hurried to her next class, she pictured the two of them dancing together, arms around each other. The picture brought a smile to her face. As long as she was at Bedford High, she thought she might as well have some fun, and Daryl Gray was the perfect person to have it with. By the time her last class of the day was over, Nancy's head was a blur of names and faces, a jumble of bells and pounding feet. As she'd expected, she hadn't done much detecting at all. Only two people, Carla and Jake, stood out in her mind as possibly connected to the vandalism and to the videotape she received. She wanted to find out more about both of them, but first she wanted to take a look around the video lab to see if she could discover any connection between the missing equipment and the mysterious tape. She wasn't taking any chances on getting lost a second time. She asked the teacher for directions and after stashing some books in her locker, made her way to room 235. The door was locked. Probably only the teacher has a key. Well, Mr. Parton had given her permission to do whatever it takes, she thought. So she reached into her duffel bag and pulled out an extremely handy little device, a credit card, and took a careful look down the hall. Connie Watson was walking straight toward her. Hi, Nancy, Connie called. I've been looking for you. The football team's got practice this afternoon, and I thought you might want to go to it with me. Connie blushed and bit her lip. You don't have to, though. I mean, if you're too busy, that's okay, she said quickly, as if she were used to being rejected. No, I think I'd like that, Nancy said, pocketing the credit card. Maybe she'd get a chance to talk to Walt Hogan. She was very curious about the cryptic conversation she'd overheard on the stairs. Let's go. The weather was warm for early October, and several dozen kids were sitting in the bleachers watching the players and the cheerleading squad. Nancy and Connie arrived just in time to see Hunk Hogan getting chewed out royally by the coach. Nancy couldn't hear what was being said, but she wondered if Walt was in trouble because he'd arrived late. If that was it, then it was probably his voice she'd heard in the main hall that morning, pleading with Jake. She hadn't recognized it when she met him, but if it was Walt, then she had more reason than ever to talk to him. The cheerleaders were energetic and colorful in their bright orange and white uniforms. Nancy admired their routines and even had to admit that Carla, who seemed to be the captain, was very good. Beside her, Connie sighed. I'd give anything to be a cheerleader, she confided. Of course, I'm too fat, so it's not even worth thinking about. Besides, even if I was skinny, I'd never make it, not with Carla Dalton in charge. She can't stand me. Nancy nodded sympathetically. She's not crazy about me either, and I don't have any clue why. Oh, that's easy, Connie said. Ever since you arrived at Bedford High, Daryl Gray hasn't taken his eyes off you, and Carla can't stand competition. She put her hand over her mouth and giggled. Personally, I love seeing Carla get what she deserves. You mean Carla and Daryl have a thing going? Nancy asked. That explained the funny look on Daryl's face when Carla's name had been mentioned. Nancy couldn't picture Daryl being interested in someone like that, but she really didn't know him all that well. Off and on, Connie told her. It's been off for a couple of weeks, but when you showed up, I guess Carla decided you were invading her territory. So Carla's jealous, Nancy thought. That might make her nasty, but it didn't make her a criminal. Actually, I'm surprised she still wants Daryl, Connie went on. Carla is only interested in one thing, money. Well, Daryl can't be heading for the poorhouse, Nancy remarked. Not if he drives around in a Porsche. It's a little weird, Connie agreed, especially since his father lost practically all his money a few months ago in some big business fiasco. For a while, the Grays were one of the richest families in Bedford, but now... Connie's voice trailed off as she shook her head in sympathy. Nancy was sympathetic too, but she was also curious. Not about the Grays' money problems, that was simply none of her business, but about what other tidbits of information Connie might have. She was something of a gossip, Nancy thought, and gossips could be a big help. Connie was chattering away again, pointing out various kids on the field when Nancy noticed the bracelet on her right wrist. That's beautiful, she said, touching it. What is it, Art Deco? I don't know, Connie said nervously, fingering the intricately patterned gold. It was a present. I don't know anything about jewelry. I love it. It looks like an antique, Nancy told her. A little flattery never hurt when you wanted information, and besides, she really liked Connie. So tell me more about Bedford High, she prompted. Hey, I hear there's some weird things going on, like stuff getting stolen and lockers broken into. You must mean the Phantom, Connie said, seeming relieved to change the subject. That's what I call him since no one knows who he is. Got any ideas? No, and most kids don't really care. I mean, it's all so juvenile. So much for inside information, Nancy thought. Then Nancy had to sit on the hard bleachers for an hour as Connie proceeded to give her a detailed account of everyone's love life, grades, family, and friends. Nancy learned a lot, but nothing that was going to help. One day down, she thought, how many more to go? Nancy arrived at school the next day, determined to start putting the puzzle together, or at least to gather a few of the pieces. Instead of study hall, she had gym during second period, and stretching her muscles and limbering up felt good. Maybe the exercise would limber up her mind too, so she could solve the case. 2 minutes into gym, though, her mind was on something else. Excuse me, a voice said. Nancy stopped in the middle of a sit-up and smiled at Carla Dalton, who was standing over her. Who knows, she thought maybe a smile would help. I'd really appreciate it, Carla said, if you'd keep your problems to yourself. What are you talking about? Carla put a hand on her cocked hip. I'm talking about the way you ran and tattled to Daryl yesterday, she said nastily. He chewed me out about it this morning. I mean, can't you fight your own battles? Let's get something straight, Nancy said calmly. I didn't tattle to Daryl. He asked me how I got lost, and I told him. I don't want to fight with you, Carla, she went on, but since you asked, yes, I can fight my own battles, and I usually win. Nancy went back to her sit-up, still smiling, but inside she was seething. This is all I need, she thought, a cat fight. A few minutes later, though, she wondered just how petty a cat fight was going to be. It was her turn on the trampoline, and as she prepared to go into a high flip, she noticed that the girl spotting her had changed places, with Carla Dalton. It threw her concentration off. It shouldn't have, but it did, and as she sprung high into the air, she knew she was off balance. There was no time to catch herself. If she'd had a reliable person spotting her, she wouldn't have worried, but Carla's back, she noticed, was conveniently turned. Before Nancy could stop herself, she was hurtling over the end of the trampoline, heading for a major collision with the floor. End of chapter 4. Hello from the States to Spinout. Welcome. And Paige, yes, Ned does exist in these. In the first chapter, Nancy mentions that Ned is kind of like her forever guy, but she's not ready for a forever commitment yet. And so occasionally the two of them kind of drift apart and date other people. So it's like Ned's like exists, but they're kind of like an off-on item. So I guess that's why she's all like into Daryl. If you can read this, you have eyes. Got it. I do. So I can read that. Welcome, Sleepy Links, to the stream. You actually caught it right at the end, and I am sorry about that, guys. But I hope you guys are enjoying it. This is really fun for me to read the book and compare it to the game. But there's definitely some differences, and I can tell that the game is loosely based on the book. But to see the differences is really kind of cool. So, oh gosh, Tom. Ugh. PG, keep it PG. Hello, who farted one? Sup to you. You caught me at the end of my stream though, so sorry about that. So my streaming schedule is kind of up in the air. I'm a little bit busy. I'm also going on vacation next Wednesday to Wednesday, so I'll be gone March 1st to 8th. There is a chance that I could stream while on vacation. I just don't know that yet. So, no guarantees. I'll definitely be on. I'll be able to pop into some other streams and things, but I won't be able to, I can't guarantee I'll be able to stream. So, anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. If I still have more housework to do, but if I get a lot done, I may come back tonight with a game stream, playing some Alibi and Ashes. If you guys want to just keep an eye out, I may be streaming again a game stream tonight. But some random spiciness. All right, Tom. Alright guys, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I'll see you all again soon. I'm gonna send you out with some music, and I will talk to y'all soon. Bye!